Yesterday, as I was periodically on Facebook, it was so neat to see so many friends, including a lot of you, post pictures with your fathers and also share stories with your fathers. In fact, that started even a few days earlier into the holiday weekend itself. As you guys know, whenever there is a holiday, I like to try to find something that I can talk about up here that will be relevant to what's on everybody's mind. So this week, as I was thinking about what to talk about on Father's Day, it occurred to me that our daily Bible reading was giving me exactly what I needed. Because this week we've been reading through the book of Proverbs, and the book of Proverbs is written as the instructions of a father to a son. This is a book of fatherly wisdom. So what I want to talk with you about this morning are some of the pieces of counsel that the father gives to his son in this book. For some of us who never had fathers, or maybe whose fathers are no longer in the family, or maybe who are still around but are not Christians, they're good men but not Christians, this book is a treasure to us because it gives us the kind of godly, fatherly advice that we crave and need, but do not have in our own homes. But we can get it here in this book. And so for those of you who are in that situation, as I am this morning, I hope that the things that you find here will encourage you, as the writer intended them to encourage his son. And for those of you who are fathers, I hope that what I talk about today will encourage you to keep doing what you are doing as described here in this book, or to encourage you to do better if that happens to be the case. And certainly for all of us who do have fathers, I hope that as we review the things the father says to his son in this book, that it will give you reason, even more reason, to celebrate your fathers, to be grateful for the way in which they have tried to share these same lessons to you as well. So I have picked 7. There's a lot more I'm sure you could pick, but I got to stop somewhere, right? So I picked 7. It's a good Bible number, so I want you to begin with me in the passage that John read for us this morning in Proverbs chapter 1. The way I have envisioned this lesson today is, if I did have a father, here are the things I would want him to have taught me. And here is the first and most important, and that is to put God first. Notice Proverbs chapter 1 and verse 7, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. The fear of the Lord. If you use a concordance or an online Bible app and just search for that phrase, you will find it dozens of times in the book of Proverbs. It is really the theme statement, not only the book of Proverbs, but also of all of the books that we call the wisdom books. As a matter of fact, I read last week from the end of the book of Proverbs, when I talked about beauty last week, where Proverbs 31 says in verse 30, charm is deceitful and beauty is vain, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. The fear of the Lord is quite literally the bookend of the book of Proverbs. Now, what does this mean? Sometimes we are quick to rush to say, now, fear doesn't mean terror, it means respect. Well, that's ultimately what I'm going to end up saying this morning, that it means. But I think in the case of God, we should not run so quickly past the idea of terror. Do you remember when the Lord gave the 10 Commandments, that they were not first given on stone tablets? They were first spoken by God. And the voice of God so terrified the people of Israel, they said, please don't do that anymore. Have Moses go up, you talk to him, he'll write them down, he'll bring them to us. I think that we need to be careful that we don't construct in our minds these visions of God as sort of this, cosmic grandfather who's, fairly harmless, just kind of pats us on our head, tells us, everything is okay, rather than understanding that God, by virtue of his mighty power, is indeed someone to be feared with holy terror. Knowing the fear of the Lord, Paul says, we persuade men. But the thing we also need to see that does balance out and round out the concept of the fear of the Lord is that this same God who is mighty and awesome and dreadful is also good. You guys know I've been on quite a C.S. Lewis kick the last year and a half or so, and it's just hard to read this passage here and not think of one of the accounts in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe when the children first hear about Aslan the lion, and they ask their guide, is he safe? Is he safe? And the guide says, of course not, but he's good. And that is the mix of fear and love that we should wrap up in this description of God who is to be feared. And what the writer says here is that comprehension of God is the beginning of knowledge, which doesn't mean like step one that once you get past it, you can leave it behind. It's the beginning of knowledge in the same way that the alphabet is the beginning of reading and writing, but as you go further into your skills of reading and writing, you don't forget the alphabet. You're just always basing whatever you do in the future on that. Or just like mathematics is based on numbers, but you don't forget mathematical numbers, but when you go on into calculus, you're just basing what you do on those numbers. And in the same way, the fear of the Lord is not something we check off and then move to something else. It is the foundation of everything else that is to follow. That beginning with the concept that there is a God who is to be loved and feared because he is good is the source of our instruction. And that is something not everyone will accept, which is another component of what it is for a father to teach his son to put God first, is to warn his son, not everyone will do that. Notice what the second part of verse 7 says. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. There are people who are going to look down with contempt and disdain as if it is unworthy the concept that the fear of the Lord is the foundation of knowledge. If you go over to chapter 3, you'll see another statement of this same principle to put God first. Look in chapter 3, verse 5. Chapter 3, verse 5, trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean, don't depend on your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge him. I was surprised to find out that this word acknowledge is this very same word. Think about its root word of knowledge or know. It's the very same word used in passages like in Genesis 4 when it says that Adam knew his wife Eve, which means more than just simply a passing acquaintance, but it's rather a deep and intimate knowledge by experience. When the writer says here, in all your ways acknowledge him, what he's saying is that the comprehension of God and a relationship with God has to permeate your whole life. The NIV says, in all your ways submit to him, precisely because that full and complete knowledge of God is controlling your life. And if you do that, he will make your paths straight. He will remove obstacles that will make your way in life easier. So, number one, put God first. Now, as I move to this second point, children, could I please have your attention? Children, look up here. For the next few minutes, take my advice. Be on your best behavior, okay? Because the second thing that I would want a father to tell me is, I discipline you because I love you. Look with me in chapter 13. Proverbs chapter 13. Proverbs 13, verse 24. Proverbs 13, 24. Whoever spares the rod hates his son, but he who loves him is diligent to discipline him. That word diligent could mean, eager and ready, or it could mean promptly. The New King James says promptly, which is to say, as soon as he can, he begins to discipline his son. Whoever spares the rod, the form of punishment, the form of corrective discipline, hates his son. Obviously, that doesn't have to always simply mean physical punishment. Much of the corrective instruction of this father is what he tells his child. Some of you have children who, if they were to take a personality test, are very much on the agreeable end of the spectrum. They are just inherently more compliant. For a child like that, a simple word that says, "I'm really disappointed," is very painful. For other children, though, it would take the Gestapo to break them down, and you've got to find some way to get the point across to them that you cannot keep doing what you are doing. Maybe taking away privileges or rights. Maybe even corporal punishment, if appropriate. I was thinking about this the other day. There is an old expression, spare the rod. Yeah, some of you have no idea what that saying is because it's just fallen out of favor, which I think is reflected in some things that we see going on in our culture. Well, what this writer is saying is, not only should you not spare the rod, if you do so, it is actually a form of hatred. When you see your child with foolishness bound up in his heart, doing things that are going to be self-destructive if the child continues in them, it is no great act of love to just simply passively stand by. It is actually abusive to permit that child to continue doing what will harm that child. It's the one who loves his child who is diligent to discipline him. And kids, this is why I was begging you, please, right now, be on your best behavior. Because I tell you what I saw happen one time in a place where I used to preach up in Indiana. The preacher was talking about, the whole sermon was about parental discipline. And I happened to be sitting sort of midway back on the aisle. And across the aisle from me, I could see one of our little boys, probably about the age of Kellen. His name was Kyle. And he was misbehaving. While at the same time the preacher was talking about parents and to be disciplinarians and crack down on their kids, and I could just see Kyle was acting up. He had no idea what the preacher was talking about. He had no idea what he was about to bring down upon himself because his mom is sitting there and everybody knows what the preacher's talking about, and I was just praying, Kyle, please straighten up. You don't know that you're going into the valley of death. And sure enough, he just kept going, and up she took him, and I just felt so bad. It was like watching a train wreck about to happen, and you just couldn't intervene to stop it. Well, children, I know it's hard. It doesn't make any sense to us in our immaturity why our parents may discipline us. But it is because they love us. Because it takes more than words sometimes to dislodge the disobedience that is in our heart. Proverbs chapter 19. Proverbs 19 and verse 18 says this. Proverbs 19:18, discipline your son, for there is hope. Do not set your heart on putting him to death. Your parents will undoubtedly make mistakes in their discipline. But you just need to know that those mistakes are driven by a sense of urgent love for you. That they know they have a limited amount of time to try to help you, to help ingrain in you the habits that will be best for you as you get older. Now, here's a third piece of fatherly wisdom that is crucial to a child's happiness. Learn the value of hard work. I'm going back over to Proverbs chapter 10. Proverbs 10 begins with an address to his son. And then that seems to start a section that goes down through verse 5. So I want to look at verse 5, Proverbs 10 and verse 5. He who gathers in summer is a prudent son. Summer is the time in that culture, in that part of the world, where they would think of gathering, where they would think of the harvest. And what the writer says here is that he who gathers in summer is a prudent son. He's someone, New American Standard says, he acts wisely. He follows the example of the ant that the proverb writer famously describes in chapter 6. Even the ant has sense enough to know that there is a time to gather, to prepare for when there is no more food. Some of you have maybe read the book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. If you have, you will remember that early in the book, he talks about something he calls the law of the school versus the law of the farm. Now here's what he's talking about. The law of the school is you can waste time, you can be lazy, you can wait to the last minute, you can try to cram, and if you have a really good short-term memory, you can cram in just enough to go take your test, spill it all out, and then move on and not actually learn anything. But if you're a clever enough child, you can game the system and get through school and make sort of okay grades. Can you wait to the last minute and cram on a farm? No, because a farm reflects real life. It reflects the natural order. There is the season to plant, there is the season to cultivate, and there is the season to harvest, and that's just how real life is, and you can't make real life bend to your will. You have to bend your will to real life. That's what this writer is calling upon his son to do. And in that part of the world, which quite frankly is a culture that many of you grew up in, if you grew up on a farm, when the time comes to plant, and then when the time comes to harvest, it is all hands on deck. Everybody's got to get out there and work. And if you don't, you're not going to eat. And that's why the writer goes on to say at the end of this verse, he who sleeps in harvest is a son who brings shame. Think about the story of the book of Ruth. Everybody's out in the field working, trying to harvest and gather things in. Ruth brought Naomi great honor because of how hard she worked. But the converse is also true. If the people in an agricultural community knew it was harvest time and all the families are out there working and they see a child who is conspicuously absent, not only is that going to bring harm to the child and his family because they're going to have not enough to eat, but it brings great disgrace on the family. Why isn't their kid out there working? And that's just simply a reflection of how real life is. What this father is teaching his child is that there is value in hard work that goes simply beyond what you make financially. But there is a sense of honor and a sense of habit that is ingrained by work that will pay dividends. Some of you right now who are kids have jobs. When I was a kid, my job that I earned money with is I went and I mowed lawns. I have no idea what the minimum wage law was when I was a child. I am sure, considering how slow I am, that I was not paid per hour, whatever the minimum wage was. But what I was learning in those jobs is a sense of respect, of showing up, of doing hard work, of knowing that you have to please the customer, which are things that pay dividends down the line. One of my very best friends, who actually also knew from that same congregation up in Indiana, was planning to go into international business. That was going to be his degree in college. And he got accepted into a very fine liberal arts school up in the Midwest called Valparaiso University. His dad worked for years in one of the steel mills up in northwest Indiana. It used to be really big steel country, not so much anymore, but they still have a lot of mills up there. His dad was a laborer. Literally, like of all the union cards, it's the bottom on the rung. You go do all the grunt work nobody else wants to do. Marshall got Trey jobs in the summer working in those steel mills. They worked 7/12s, 7 day a week, 12 hours a day shifts. It was brutal, hot, dirty work. Trey was staying with me one of those summers, and when he would come home, he was just completely covered with the dirt and grime of that mill. And the reason his dad wanted Trey to do those jobs is not because he wanted Trey to have that as his career, although it is a noble line of work. It's because he wanted him to stay in school. Because he wanted him to do something based on his talent and ability he could do that would be a better living. And the way to teach him the value of that hard work was to take him to those mills and work those 7-day, 12-hour-a-day shifts in the mill. That's what a good father does for his or her child, his child, which may be a him or a her. That's what a father does for his child, son and daughter, is to teach them the value of hard work. And my fourth point is another aspect of the value of a flourishing life. And that is, I would want a father to teach me to enjoy the commitment of marriage. Look over in chapter 5. Chapter 5. In the previous verses, he's describing a relationship of love like quenching your thirst. And then he says this in verse 18, "Let your fountain be blessed and rejoice in the wife of your youth." Now that you are all scholars in biblical poetry, what is fountain parallel to? To the wife of your youth. So that which will quench, assuage his thirst, what will satisfy him, his fountain is his wife. But notice, the wife of your youth. What does that mean? This is not simply a sentimental reference to young love. It is the fact that the wife you started with, you stay with. She's the wife of your youth. You married her maybe when you were young, but you're going to stay with her. You're not going to trade her out for divorce and someone else. You're not going to go have a bunch of affairs. This is the one you will stay with, and she is the one who will satisfy you. She will be to you, he says, a lovely deer and a graceful doe. And because she is so lovely and so graceful, she will satisfy you. The next part here says, let her breasts fill you at all time with delight. Satisfy you is what some of your Bibles say. And be intoxicated always with her love. The New American Standard says, be exhilarated. The New King James says, be enraptured with her love. Now, what's interesting here, if you have an ESV, I didn't check the other translations, but the ESV has a footnote that says, in Hebrew, this means led astray. Maybe a way to think of this is to be carried away. Be carried off, be carried away by the beauty of the physical intimacy of your relationship. And let that be so always. Be intoxicated, exhilarated, carried away, always in her love. Children need to see parents who have a vibrant and passionate commitment to each other in marriage, especially in our culture, which either ignores marriage or betrays marriage or has redefined marriage. Because I didn't have a father, because my mom was not married, it always worried me from the youngest days I can remember, what kind of examples will I have as a husband someday? How will I know what to do? So I was always on the look for couples that I could try to learn from. And I will share with you one of the defining experiences of my childhood. My little hometown in Kentucky, there was a couple named Lou and Buck Blevins. And a lot of times in those days, especially on Sunday night, when mom was unfaithful and granny and pop often didn't go, I would get pop to drop me off at the building, and then maybe somebody else would give me a ride home. And so one of the days I got to the building, pop dropped me off, I was really early, and there was a car out in the parking lot, and I walked in and saw Buck furiously wiping lipstick off of his mouth. Because I walked in on them smooching while they thought they were there at the building by themselves. And I thought at that moment, if I ever find a woman crazy enough to marry me, I want to kiss her whenever I want to. Now that's what I learned from that experience. Because what I saw was a couple who were up in years, but the passion and vibrancy of their relationship was still strong. Show your kids how a man is to love and cherish a woman, which is not only an important thing for a young man to see, but also important for a young woman to understand how it is that a young lady should be treated by a man who loves her. So parents, a father needs to teach his child to enjoy the commitment of marriage, and on the other hand, to avoid the wrong kind of woman. Continue on here in chapter 5, verse 20. Why should you be intoxicated? That's the same word. And if you put in led astray or captivated, why should you be carried away, my son, with a forbidden woman and embrace the bosom of an adulteress? Now, previously in the book, if you did the daily Bible reading, you know that Solomon talks about all kinds of terrible consequences that can inherit upon a man who sleeps with someone else's wife. He's going to cause someone to be angry at him. That person actually may come and retaliate and take vengeance on him, and then all of your possessions will belong to someone else. Those are all consequences that are in this life. But on top of all of those, notice the ultimate consequence. Verse 21, for a man's ways are before the eyes of the Lord, and he ponders all his paths. On top of all the consequences we may ever want to outline to people in terms of their sexual behavior, all the terrible things that they may have to experience in this life, we can never forget the prime and ultimate motivator to holy living is God sees everything, and we will give an account to him. Verse 22, the iniquities of the wicked ensnare him, and he's held fast in the cords of his sin. He dies for lack of discipline, and because of his great folly, he is, and here's our word again, except no versions will translate it intoxicated or exhilarated. Now they'll say led astray or captivated. The way to put that all together is be carried away by your wife. Don't get carried away by an immoral woman, or you will be carried away into judgment. And so a good father will teach his children, on the one hand, to enjoy a marital relationship of passion and commitment, but on the other hand, to avoid relationships which are illicit according to the will of God. Now, discipline, hard work, family are virtues that even to this day, stereotypically, we still think of fathers giving to their children. The last 2 points I want to give you this morning, though, are not necessarily things that we take for granted that fathers should do, but in the book of fatherly wisdom, they are featured. A father should tell his child, I'm proud of you. Proud of you for doing what's right. Look over in chapter 23. Chapter 23. Chapter 23, verse 15. Proverbs 23:15 says, my son, if your heart is wise, my heart too will be glad. My inmost being, literally it's the kidneys. We don't normally think of those as a great seat of emotion, but they did in that day and time. From deep within me, I will exult, I will rejoice, I will celebrate when your lips speak what is right. Now, by the way, when he says speak what is right, although this book is certainly primarily from a father to a son, women are not excluded from this book. In fact, back in chapter 8, when the writer wants to describe what wisdom is, he personifies wisdom as a woman, Lady Wisdom, who it says in Proverbs 8 speaks what is right. He's commending his son here for speaking what Lady Wisdom says. But what I want you to see is that not only is the father proud of his son, celebrating his son for doing what is right, but what really thrills this parent is when his son starts to speak what is right to others. Which is to say, when the father sees his child not only do what is right, but then pass that on to someone else, probably, and I would imagine he's thinking about the son's children. When a father starts to see multi-generations of people seeking the righteousness of God, that is a source of celebration. what I want you to see here is that this father certainly disciplines his child when that child needs it, certainly corrects and instructs his child. But as a father, are you leaving off something important if you don't also ever tell your kid, I'm so proud of you. I'm so proud of you. You thrill my heart because I see what you're doing. This is a little bit of a somber day in our family because maybe right about now or in another half hour or so, my father-in-law will have a letter read up in Rochelle expressing his resignation from the eldership. I talked to him a little bit this morning. I asked my mother-in-law to go get him donuts. That's our love language, is donuts. So she went and got him some donuts. I talked to him a little bit. It's going to be a sad day, you know. But I can't tell you personally how great it has been to have him in my life. And to have him periodically tell me how proud he is. I mean, every son and daughter craves to hear that from their father. And that's what this father did for his son. Celebrated his successes. And then the father in the book of Proverbs tells his son, and by implication his daughter, hang in there. Look back in chapter 3. Now we've already talked about parental discipline. It's going to be the same point here except applied on the ultimate level, and that is the discipline of our Heavenly Father. Proverbs 3. Now in verses 9 and 10, the writer talks about prosperity, barns overflowing with plenty. Proverbs speaks in generalities. Generally speaking, you work hard, you're going to have success. But Proverbs also says the famine comes and the land is taken from the poor by injustice. Proverbs does acknowledge there are times when there are exceptions to these general guidelines. Verses 9 and 10 say, you honor the Lord and you're going to be prosperous, but there are going to be days when you suffer adversity. How should you respond? And here's the answer. Verse 11, my son, do not despise or reject the Lord's discipline or be weary of his reproof. Don't resent what God is doing in you. This doesn't mean, of course, that anytime we lose a job or we get sick or we suffer heartbreak, God is disciplining us. That's not the way to think of it as I understand the scriptures, but it does mean that when we go through adverse circumstances, God is at work in those to bring out a good in our life. And as a result of that, we should embrace it. And then here's the reassurance he gives. For the Lord reproves him whom he loves. Why do fathers discipline their children? They love them. Why does God discipline us? He loves us. As a father, the son in whom he delights. One paraphrase says, as a father corrects their favorite child. So look around. If you're the favorite child, how does your father correct you? The child in whom he delights. The writer says, if God is disciplining you, he delights in you. So hang in there. A few weeks ago, I saw a video that I've never played a video ever in preaching or teaching. I'm going to try it today. If this doesn't work, do not blame our crack AV staff in the back. It means that I botched this. But I hope I can get this to play, because it says in 30 seconds more than I could ever say on this point.
This is so... Buddy Puddles. Buddy Puddles. This is Buddy Puddles. I don't want you to fall.
Now, I know what some of you mothers are thinking. Well, they may be going to clean those clothes like that, all right? So I know what's going on in your mind. I love that video so much. This little girl wanted to do something, but she was a little afraid. Who knows how deep that puddle is? But if Dad will come down in here with me, he doesn't even have to hold my hand the whole time, just let me get steady, then I can have some fun. That's what a father can do for a child. To encourage them that they can handle the uncertainties of life, in part because Dad will be there with you. And of course, it's hard not to see that video and think about what our Heavenly Father has done for us. Just like that father in the video got down into the puddle to be with his daughter, God sent his son to come down here and get in it with all of us, to help us, to hold our hand, so that no matter what we experience, we can stand up. We can bear what we face. Enjoy life now, and really enjoy life with him forever. That is fatherly wisdom, and we give it to you today to consider as a parent or a child. And most of all, to consider as a child of God or as someone who needs to become a child of God. Maybe this morning you need to put your faith in Jesus Christ and be baptized into him, to be adopted into the family of God, to be born again by the new birth. We would love to help you do that while we stand and sing together.